Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. My name is Jay Moschella. I'm a curator here at the Boston Public Library Division of Special Collections. It is really my pleasure to welcome you here to the library tonight. The Dwiggins Lecture is one of my favorite events. It brings together printers, typographers. I see booksellers who have built our collections. I see researchers who have used them, conservators, and people who are dedicated to the book and design in all its many forms. I do want to remind you, if you've never been here before, that the Boston Public Library is a public library. The collections many of you saw moments ago are not only open to the public, but they belong to the public. So I would encourage you to come back and visit us in the Boylston building on floor 3. We're open Wednesday through Friday, and every item in our collection, including all of our Pennyroyal Press books and Barry Moser illustrated books, are open and available for you to inspect at your leisure. So thank you again for coming. I do want to now introduce the president of the Society of Printers, Sarah Halsey, to tell you a bit about the Society and their work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jay. And thank you to the Boston Public Library for co-hosting with the Society of Printers the Dwiggins Lecture for over half a century. It's a privilege to have had such a long and fruitful relationship with the BPL. I'm Sarah Halsey. I'm the president of the Society of Printers, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to the 51st annual William Addison Dwiggins Lecture at the Boston Public Library. Boston's Society of Printers was founded in 1905, partly as a response to the social and aesthetic ideals of the English arts and crafts movement. It was formed with the goal of furthering excellence in the art of printing through the studies of the best examples of design, printing, and craftsmanship. This was a period of a great number of technological and stylistic changes in the field of printing. The Society represented a vein of excellence and devotion to fine printing and design. At the time, the term printing, as in the Society of Printers, included today what are a variety of different professions, not just the mechanical application of ink on paper, but also the arrangement of type on the page, the design of types themselves, and the undertaking of the publication of books. Society of Printers members today encompass all of these professions, as well as illustration, lettering, binding, education, collecting, curating, and bookselling. As a private society, we meet once a month on Beacon Hill and hear a lecture much like this one, although in a more intimate setting. We also have a dinner, which is about not just good food and conviviality, but it's a chance for members to converse with each other and our guests, forming professional and personal connections with like-minded colleagues. The Dwiggins Lecture is our opportunity to share with the wider Boston community some of what we're fortunate to share with each other each month. The lecture is named in honor of William Addison Dwiggins, one of our early members and an important figure in the field. The speakers in this lecture series have traveled here from around the country and around the world and represent some of the most respected luminaries in the arts of design and printing. However, we are also privileged to have within our own membership some of the field's most distinguished practitioners. Of the prior 50 Dwiggins lectures, 14 of them have been members of the Society of Printers. And tonight, we are very proud to welcome an illustrious member of our society as this year's Dwiggins lecturer, Barry Moser. Before I hand the podium over to the member who will introduce Barry, I want to draw your attention to this very handsome poster for the event that was designed by Society member and past president, Lance Heide. The poster features Barry's wood engraving for The Widow and the Tree, a novel by Sony Brewer. We'd like to offer a copy of the poster to each member in the audience, so if you haven't already done so, please collect your copy outside of Rabb Hall after the lecture. And now, Barry Moser will be introduced to you by Phil Salmon. Phil is a member of the Governing Council of the Society of Printers and co-owner of Phillips Salmon & Company Rare Books, a Boston rare book dealer offering the book beautiful in all of its forms. Thank you, Phil. And thank you very much, Barry, for being here this evening. It's an honor to have you speak to us.
Thank you, Sarah. And as the last thing standing between you and the main event, I will strive to be brief, but concise. Anyone who grew up reading comic books understands the inherent narrative power that comes from the combination of words and images in storytelling. In the comic book, that linkage is essential, as it enables images to do most of the heavy lifting, sequentially moving along the plot structure supported by dialogue. With an illustrated book, however, the text is the focal point, supported by images that help imbue a detail with significance for the reader, thus deepening his or her enjoyment and connection to the text. As a comic book reader in my own youth, I implicitly understood the image's crucial storytelling role, a dynamic that was later enhanced through my introduction to the wordless woodcut novels of Lind Ward and Hans Mazriel, books in which the image assumes the sole responsibility for moving along the narrative arc. And that led to a deeper appreciation for the emotional resonance of the woodcut and wood engraving as a medium, which, in turn, brought me to Barry Moser. We met through Dante, whose acquaintance I had previously made via a plain used paperback edition of Henry Carey's stately but staid 19th century prose translation of the Inferno. I now revisited the father of the Italian language in a handsome quarto format featuring Alan Mandelbaum's fresh take on the poetry of hell, amplified by Barry's engravings that worked in harmony to reveal enough about the characters encountered on Dante's way into the netherworld, while simultaneously concealing enough to let my imagination do most of the work. Barry's interpretation of the Divine Comedy is the descendant of a lineage that dates back to 1487 and counts among its forebears Gustave Doré, Salvador Dali, and Leonard Baskin, one of Barry's early Virgil figures. As I made my way through a career in rare books, I would encounter other significant works of literature that bore Barry's imprimatur. For his Pennyroyal Press, he designed and illustrated Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, which garnered the 1983 American Book Award for Design, Frankenstein, which he has called his favorite book, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, The Wizard of Oz, and the monumental Pennyroyal Caxton Bible. His illustrations for the Aryan Press Moby Dick form the architecture of a book I have called the Kelmscott Chaucer of the American 20th century. Present in all his work, including the scores of watercolor illustrations he produced for commercial publishers, is the combining of the familiar, he often uses family and friends as models for his figures, with the universal to invite the reader to ponder a new way of looking at an established literary work. His mise-en-scene is cinematic, offering up a strong vision of character and a sense of place in nature. All this executed with Barry's uncompromising precision and experienced eye for design. Taken together, Barry's visual storytelling brings us to that moment Aristotle described in his Poetics, when an artistic representation causes one to exclaim, "Ah, that is he." Tonight, we shall discover Barry's natural skills as a verbal storyteller as he recounts the tale of how he came to his chosen métier, his development as an artist, and the characters who shaped that journey. Having worked on Barry's most recent exhibit at Bromer Gallery in 2019, which included 2 gallery talks, I can tell you that you're in for a treat. Ladies and gentlemen, here to deliver the 51st Dwiggins Lecture, it is an honor and my distinct pleasure to introduce my friend, Barry Moser.
You all have no idea of how profoundly honored I am to be here, and how honored I am that you, my audience, have given me the gift of your time and your presence. And I want to thank my old friend Lance Heidi for that poster. Makes me feel real proud. And one more thing before I get started. I was scheduled for cataract surgery. That never happened. It hasn't happened yet. My vision isn't quite as clear as it should be, so forgive me if I stumble. I just warn you ahead of time. All right. Y'all ready? All right. When Phil Simonek invited me to give the Dwiggins lecture, I was stunned. I mean, wham. It was just too much. How, you never expected. And I couldn't believe it. I immediately thought, how can this happen to a man who, as a boy, was barely literate and bigoted and came from and was spawned from an unlettered, you see what I'm saying? I'm sorry. I hope it's not going to be that all the way through. I immediately thought, how can this happen to a man who as a boy was largely illiterate or barely literate and who was spawned from an unlettered and bigoted background and who hated school and reading so much? How can that man end up here in this great library about to give a talk about wringing images out of words? I don't know how I got here, but here I stand or sit. And I'm hoping that I'm worthy of being here on this spot where some mighty fine designers, typographers, and bibliophiles of our time have come before me. The phrase wringing words out of images, images out of words, sorry about that, just kind of rolled out of my mouth without thinking when Phil asked me, Phil and I were tossing around ideas for the title. I liked it and Phil liked it, so we kept it. The idea being that an illustrator wrings images out of words, much like my Aunt Gracie used to wring water out of her sheets or the head of the chicken for Sunday dinner. I moved north in 1967 to teach at Williston Academy in East Hampton. That's my other profession, teaching. I've been working at it for 60-odd years now, and much of it has been devoted to opening the eyes of young men and women and to the joys of calligraphy, typography, and fine printing. One of my duties at Williston was to work in the theater. I designed posters for their productions and sets for their plays. One of those plays was John Brown's Body, for which I did this portrait of Mr. Brown. It's pretty obvious that I didn't know much about typography when I did this one. Rich Hindle, the design and production manager at UMass Press, saw the poster somewhere and contacted me asking if I would do a portrait for the jacket of a book that they were producing. The book in mind was called Eli, Too Black, Too White. And I did this portrait of Ely Green, who was a beloved mixed-race athletic trainer at the University of the South. That went well, and then Hindle offered me a commission to illustrate the flowering plants of Massachusetts. I did nearly 400 of flower-bearing plants living in the Commonwealth east of the Hudson River. Hindle said that the book would be a cross between a tabletop book and a field manual, so I had to get everything right, and for the most part, I did. Now, that was a long time ago, but I didn't get many wrong, and those that did get wrong were from my being stupid and drawing dead plants. Now, Eli was my first book, though it was only a jacket. And today I have a hard time getting my head around the fact that for 50 of my 85 years, my life has been braided with books. I met Lenny Baskin in 1968. I admired his work since I was a freshman at Auburn University down in Alabama. I was browsing an art magazine and came across a reproduction of his Death of Narcissus. I was completely wonderstruck, and I began following his career. I even kept a file of articles pulled from magazines and newspapers. He was a powerful influence on my work early on, like this and this. But the best thing emerging from Baskin's tutelage, however, was his introducing me to Harold McGrath. Hal, Mac, Magister Ludicrous, Old Weird Harold, Poppy, Harold P. He was loved by many names. And to me, he was Mac. He was father, brother, and mentor to me for 31 years until he died on November 15, 2000. I loved that man. Legendary printer, doting Gradnetti. Mac was my coach. In the early years, as I learned how to set type and how to get the upper hand on an ornery old clamshell press, he was my maven as I set type and printed this, my first book, Red Rag. It's a biting letter James McNeill Whistler wrote and aimed it at John Ruskin. I wanted to engrave Whistler's portrait for this, but I wasn't skilled enough to do that. So I did a scratchboard drawing and printed it from a line cut. Eventually, I learned how to engrave that wood. And to prove it, here's another portrait of Mr. Whistler 40 years later from a book of portraits David Godine published in 2010. By the way, he wants me to tell you about all the books I illustrated from him over the years. And if I didn't, he would resort to physical violence. And I do hope he restrains himself. Well, I think there are about a dozen of those, David. Anyway, the Red Rag cast my little boat of hope and wonder out into the waters and launched my career in books, a profession nobody could have seen for me when I was a boy. But there was a hint in the 9th grade when we were reading William Blake. And I remember making a drawing of a tiger with huge eyes and enormous paw, illustrating the tiger. I think it looked more like a dumpster cat than it did a tiger. And this one is not real. We made this up just for tonight, just for y'all. And I remember finding a copy of Goethe's Faust in the library, printed in German Fraktur. I couldn't read it, of course, but I did look at the pages ardently, solely to study that typeface. When I got my driver's license, I drove around town begging for old out-of-date type catalogs from advertising agencies. I drew this when I was 17. I've obviously then, you can see, been fascinated with letters all my life. I say I drew it because I outlined every letter and filled it in. Didn't know much about calligraphy either, though I did have a copy of the Speedball lettering manual. I still have it, and I copied out of it. Just too bad I didn't read it. The first book to bear the Pennyroyal Press imprint was The Death of the Narcissus, 1970. The Red Rag was issued under Williston's Castalia Press imprint in 1969. Technically speaking, The Death of the Narcissus is a portfolio holding a dozen prints on the theme of birth, death, love, and leavings. The backstory is that a friend gave me a bowl of paper narcissus for Christmas, and they had died. I wrote and told her that the narcissus is dead. Those 4 words stuck in my head and were the catalyst for the project for which I ran 12 images out of 1 sentence. Jack Coughlin, another of my teachers, urged me to get an MFA if I ever wanted to teach above the high school level. I took that advice seriously and enrolled in graduate school at UMass in 1970. The great blessing of grad school was my meeting Fred Becker. Fred took me under his wing and helped me in my quest to learn how to engrave wood. Had it not been for Fred Becker, I would have laid down my spit stickers permanently. But he spurred me on. And out of that experience came Bacchanalia. The text was translated by Douglas Graham, and it was here working with Fred that I cut my first block that really looked like a wood engraving and not a linoleum cut. I never finished that MFA. Meanwhile, my early new boy work was getting noticed here and there. Sandra Kirschenbaum, the editor of the journal Fine Print, invited me to a cocktail party at her home in San Francisco. And that's where I met Andrew Hoyam. He asked if I could cut 100 blocks inside a year for his upcoming Moby Dick. I was a mite cocky, I have to say, and I said yes. He wrote up a letter of agreement, and I signed it too hastily, and I got to work. But once I was into that work, the waters got rough. I'll spare you the details, but Moby Dick was a big leap toward my getting here tonight. I still can't get over it. Sorry, I know that I'm not here because of my youthful good looks or my talent. Talent is as common as house dirt. If it does play a part in my life, in my work, then it is my talent for work, for doing that work over and over and over, wringing it out and never, ever being satisfied with it. But regarding Moby Dick, Mr. Andrew Hoyam should take credit for illustrating the Orion Press Moby Dick, not I. I drew and rendered his ideas in wood, and I do think that his overarching scheme was brilliant. The image would only picture, the images I was allowed would only picture the life and work on an American whaler prior to 1841, the year that Melville put out on the whaler Acushnet. He mandated that there would be no solid blacks, no characters, no portraits. And he allowed one single full-page illustration, a whale, but noticeably not a white whale. Despite his word being final on everything, he still insisted that a panel of maritime specialists vet my sketches to be sure they were accurate. Now think about that. Think about how intimidating that was. As I said, portraits were off the table for Moby Dick until now. For 50 years, after my falling out with Andrew Hoyam, I had no truck with Orion Press. And then 2 years ago, out of the blue, they asked me to illustrate Gilgamesh for them and told me that Nick Basbanes was writing the introduction. Now, Nick and I go back to 1985, so his being involved made the project really inviting. And somewhere in our many exchanges, I showed the Orion Press a project I was working on called Omissions, Portraits and Scenes from Herman Melville's Moby Dick. I produced 100 copies of that little book, but woefully the finished books were riddled with typos. I sucked it up, brought in 2 readers, but sadly not an editor. I reprinted it, 100 more finished books on the floor, only to find them marred with the same kind of errors. I gave it up. But now the good folks in San Francisco have revived it under the title Postscriptum. Among the 11 portraits is this Ahab, which I modeled after Ezra Pound. And then after Moby Dick wrapped, I took on a project, being a dunderhead, for which I was supremely unqualified, the Divine Comedy. Alan Mandelbaum, the translator, was in my studio one day and saw some drawings that he admired and insisted I mean, the man would not take no for an answer. He insisted that I do drawings like those for his Inferno that the University of California Press was going to publish. Mandelbaum got his way. My stress level increased dramatically, and in 1980, Inferno was published. Purgatorio was published in 1982. Sorry about that slur. And Paradiso in 1984. Now, I think Paradiso is the best of the lot. I was keeping good company back 40 years ago and putting on some much-needed intellectual muscle. The success of Moby Dick did not go unnoticed in our shop, and it set us thinking. I knew I could design a book as well as Andrew Owen, and I did cut those 100 blocks. And Harold McGrath could print better than anybody anywhere. So why couldn't we do something big, something or another? We made a list of books that interested me and asked booksellers in America and Great Britain which of them they could sell best. And Alice took The Brass Ring. I'd never read Alice, which was a good thing for the illustrations because they meant that I wouldn't be dragging any constipating prejudices from childhood. I read it as an adult. And that may be why those images have a turn toward the dark. My youngest daughter was a spitting image of Alice Little, which you can see here. So I had a built-in 10-year-old model right there, right on hand. I also had a big tomcat who one morning left me a completely unsullied, though decapitated, rabbit head on the doorstep, which I froze to my daughter's dismay. And I used it when time came to address the Marsh Hare. Alan Mandelbaum sat for the Mad Hatter, and that was in 1982. Year 1983 saw the Pennyroyal Press edition of Frankenstein come alive. I read Frankenstein in college and took it as a metaphor for the atomic age. And when I began working on the illustrations, I was thinking along the same lines, because it is, no doubt. But then there's the river scene, where Victor's creature is still very much an innocent. I saw something there that I'd never seen before. The creature saves a young woman who fell into a raging river. Her boyfriend shows up with a gun. He shoots it. He shoots the person who saved his girlfriend. Why? I had to ask myself that. Why? Well, it was because he was 8 feet tall and his skin was yellow. Miss Shelley tells us that. If our innocent had been 5'10" with Caucasian skin, the boyfriend would have thanked him for jumping in and saving his sweetie. And that throws me back to my childhood, growing up in a racist family, in a racist society. My grandfather and my uncle were Klansmen, KKK Klan. And that is why I use multicolored engravings for the portraits. Each color is a different block, because I am on the creature's side here. And I gave him something that nobody else gets, color. Michael and Winifred Bixler set the type without paragraph returns, using instead a Pilcrow between paragraphs. And I have to say they did a bang-up job of it. Mr. Godine says that it's the most beautiful book Pennyroyal Press has ever produced. And he might be right, up until year 2000. In 1985, the Mark Twain Project at the Bancroft Library at UC Berkeley, asked me to collaborate with them on a centennial edition of Huckleberry Finn. Given the liberties printers and editors took with his manuscripts over the years, the book had never appeared as Mark Twain wrote it. The plan then was for me to produce a limited edition, and they would subsequently reproduce it as a hardback trade edition via the University of California Press. I'd never read Huckleberry Finn, no surprise there. And when I did, I was deeply moved. Toward the end of the story, Huck, Jim, and that little bastard Tom Sawyer were running away from an angry crowd with the idea of looking to hang Jim. A shot is fired. Sawyer is hit. Well, he had it coming. They escape to an island in the river, but Huck knows that Tom's got to be tended to. So he goes back and fetches the doctor. Jim stays with Tom until the doctor arrives. If I had been Jim, I'd have left that little bastard to the snakes. But not Jim. No. He stayed with his tormentor and tended to him. The only moment of integrity and nobility in the whole novel, in my opinion. I used to travel down to the Caribbean a good bit, and right after I wrapped Huck Finn, I was lounging on a beach with a drink in my hand as a heavy storm cumbered in. I ignored my kids' warnings and stayed on the beach, watching this thing come on. As I watched, the cloud billowed and churned, and I saw a face in there, like kids do. And then I recognized this face. My imagination had just cooked up a chubby book dealer that I knew in East Hampton. Seeing that big face up in the cloud before it disappeared put me in mind of a humdrum wizard who lives in the land of Oz. Never read that one either. But being the father of 3 daughters, I had seen parts of the movie enough times to know that Dorothy is swept up in a cyclone. And that was the light bulb moment. Dorothy goes up a hole. Alice goes down a hole. Both are girls. Both embark on solitary voyages. Well, holy mama. Perhaps the Wizard of Oz would be a good follow-up to Alice. And I wondered if I might be able to make Dorothy into the American Alice. There are certainly parallels and perpendiculars between those two characters. One of them was born into wealth, the other into poverty. One on a small island, the other on a mighty continent. They both have very strange adventures, and both meet some exceedingly strange characters. The Wringing cabinet gave me, free of charge, outstanding subjects for the characters I built for The Wizard of Oz. Nancy Reagan, Smith College class of 43, made a notable contribution to my efforts, as did Alexander Haig and Caspar Weinberger. And I rang those images out of a storm cloud. The first draft of this talk didn't include any children's books. But then I changed my mind because they are a considerable block of my illustrated books. 100 of them if you include translations and second editions, 80-something if you don't. I was commissioned to do my first one in 1985, Jump. It was a retelling of 5 Brer Rabbit stories told by Malcolm Jones and Van Dyke Parks, both Southerners. I grew up hearing those stories, as they did. And I read them to my children when they were growing up, and I read them to my students. When I was offered the commission, I was prejudiced and thought that making pictures for kids was beneath me. There, I said it. I confessed it. But I needed the money and I took the job. And when I started composing those images and designing the book, I found out that there ain't no difference. Designing a book for children and creating images for that book parallel all the other books I've ever done. Except here, I aim for laughter, smiles, guffaws. When those animals put on clothes, they take on the livery of language and talk just like I did when I was a kid. Jump is still in print and has had 2 sequels. Whoopi Goldberg read it on tape for a special recorded Christmas edition. And get this, 10 years down the pike, I was writing books for kids. That's not entirely accurate. I was retelling stories for children. I retold The Tinderbox. And I retold the Ballad of Polly Vaughan. But this evening, I want to trot out my Rumpelstiltskin retelling, a story I call Tucker Pfeffercorn. Y'all know the story. Tucker's a nasty little goblin, and I wrung him out of a state trooper and a toddler. And here's that story. Driving to Providence one morning, going down to Risley to teach, I saw a statey directing traffic at a construction site. And this guy, he was fierce looking. Got a big, huge pipe hanging out of his mouth. That dude looked like he was going to eat children for breakfast. But he was my Tucker. I wanted to find him. So I went through a friend, a retired statey. We arranged a photo shoot, and he came. And he does not eat children for breakfast. No, he's a great guy and a devoted daddy to his daughter. The other half of my Tucker was my 4-year-old granddaughter, Isabel, who is in the audience. And we dressed her up in her little denim coveralls. And Emily, who is holding her, Emily is Patty McLaughlin's daughter. And she modeled for the mama. Then I married those 2 figures into a single character, my Tucker Pfeffercorn, who we see here hanging just before exploding in a fit of pique, like a big puff mushroom. One of my children's books, and one of my favorites, is The Magic Wood, a poem by Henry Treece, written during World War II. I came to know the poem through a recording by Joan Baez in 1969. It's a hypnotic poem warning children that they ought not to go to the woods at night. The wood is full of creeping feet. Let me start that again. The wood is full of shining eyes. The wood is full of creeping feet. The wood is full of tiny cries. You must not go to the wood at night. He sang me a song in backwards words and drew me a dragon in the air. I saw his teeth through the back of his head and a rat's eyes winking from his hair. Beautiful stuff. Year 1995 came along and presented me an opportunity to make my biggest dream come true. Back when I was a preacher boy, I don't think anybody told you that, did they? I was a licensed Methodist preacher when I was a kid, preacher boy. And I read the King James Bible 2 or 3 times. I don't think I skipped the genealogies until my 3rd read. When I learned to set type and when I composed and printed my first pages, I dreamed of shooting big and imagined illustrating and printing a Bible one day. It would be my Everest. And that dream came true. One Sunday afternoon in 1987, at the old Gotham Book Mart in Manhattan, I met a man at an exhibit of watercolors I had done for Truman Capote type. He asked me if there was something I wanted to do, but I hadn't. And I said, yes, I want to do a Bible one day. He asked me why I hadn't done it. And I told him I didn't think I was smart enough or wise enough And Harold McGrath was going to retire soon, and I'd want him to print it. Besides, I would never, ever have the money to do it the way I would want to do it. And he said, well, if you ever change your mind, maybe get in touch with me. Time passed, and I forgot that conversation. But Jeff Dwyer, my agent, refreshed my memory. He had contact information and advised me to get in touch with him, and I did. And Bruce Kovner became my patron, my angel, and my friend. I began with the New Testament. I was given to understand that that had been a tradition in printing the Christian Bible for centuries. Though that wasn't the reason I did it. We did it to have a unit that was finished so that if I died before I finished the whole project, Bruce would have something as an entity that he could sell. But I began with the crucifixion. And I finished the last one in 1999, Adam and Eve in the garden. In between, we see 232 images, like the ones you're seeing. There are some 232 engravings in the book. There's also a box of blocks down in my basement that I didn't use for one reason or another. Fudd Benson, by the way, did that God that you saw just a moment ago. Bradley Hutchinson printed it at his shop in Austin, Texas, on his Heidelberg KSBA. The mold-made archival paper was made for us by Zircol Mills in Germany and bears our watermark. Catherine and Howard Clark at the Twin Walker Mills made paper for our deluxe 7-volume presentation of the Bible. Matthew Carter modified his Galliard typeface for the project and designed an original Hebrew typeface called Lebe Hebrew. We used his Mantegna for the display. Tim Barrett made some sturdy, gorgeous paper for us to use as end sheets for the bindings. It was bound in 2 volumes in limp vellum by Claudia Cohen and Sarah Creighton in their East Hampton binderies. Claudia told me that the German vellum maker nearly choked when he got the order. Never seen us order that big. The Bible was a hard act to follow. But I did find a worthy challenge when I addressed Frederick Douglass's narrative of his life as an American slave in 2020. I believe that artists have a responsibility to look and to never look away, no matter how heinous the grist. So I'm showing you here only the flanking angels of birth and death with a bit of nastiness thrown in between. We illustrators are at our best witnesses, and the work I did for the narrative is possibly my best. But the subject matter I chose to illustrate the narrative with was depressingly awful, even for me, old, grizzled, shock-proofed me. And it often sent me into an awful magma of self-imposed heartache. The most recent title on the Pennyroyal shelf is Herman Melville's novella, Billy Budd. It began with a commission for a drawing to be used on a prospectus announcing an exhibition of Mr. Will Johnston's collection of Billy Budd first editions at the Grolier Club in 2024. One thing led to another. Buoyed along by Valeria Hotchkiss, head of special collections at Oberlin. John Bryant, a Melville scholar, instrumental in acquiring the Melville Electronic Library for us to use. And the man himself, Mr. Will Johnston, without whom the book would not have happened. And the illustrations are, by the way, not wood engravings. They are woodcuts, 2 entirely different media. And Billy Budd was printed by Brad Hutchinson too. He and I designed the book together, and Bradley printed it with the usual grace and beauty that are the hallmarks of his work. I'm going to shut up now. Flannery O'Connor said something like, I don't know if I'm finished or not, but the time has come to quit. So thank you and good night, folks. I really do appreciate your being here. Thank you. Be careful. Stay safe.
Barry, will you take some questions?
I certainly will.
Thank you.
Allow me a minute to get over this.
We have 2 microphones, so if you could raise your hands and then please wait to speak until the microphone reaches you.
Bear in mind, though, that I am deaf as a stone. Somebody got a question?
My husband and I looked at the books we have illustrated by you, and we were both tremendously moved by the flowering plants of Massachusetts. Each one of those, to me, I paint portraits of people, but those seemed like portraits of each of the flowers. Any comment on that?
You'd have to come over here to ask the question. I can't hear you.
So
I can't hear that.
Can you hear this?
Yes. That's
Hi.
better.
So one of our Society of Printers members asked about the portraits of the flowers.
Yeah.
And said that she herself paints portraits and finds those paintings of flowers almost portraits of flowers, and wonders if you could say anything more about that.
I was working with a botanist named Harry Ellis, A-H-L-E-S. And Harry had never been to college. First time he went to college was to lecture. But he was a great botanist, and I was out in the field with him because he was doing the flowering plants. But then Harry died. I did the drawings in 1969, but the book didn't come out until, 10, 18 years. I don't know what it was, but a long time after. And in between, the book lay completely, undone. I don't think I asked the question, did I? I can't hear. Did that answer any? Did it come close?
Marianne, is that close? I know more than I did. Yes, she knows more than she did.
I can stand up here and help interpret with the questions so you can hear better. Do you want me to do that?
Go where?
If I stand here and they ask a question, then I can
That'd be great.
reiterate the question.
This is my daughter, Madeline. Okay, what was the question?
Well, I don't know. I'm sorry. I would have to start with the next question, or we can start again on that one.
Yeah. Anybody? Yes.
Might you say a few words about the movie that you were part of, Barry?
Oh,
You got that one?
I did hear that, yeah. For the last 8 years, maybe, Fred, we've been working on this film. Ralph Heyman, the filmmaker, started this a long time. He had just come off of a documentary about, help me, Richard Wilbur, thank you, yeah. And so we came together in Michelson's gallery in Northampton, and just sort of casually, Ralph asked me if he could do a documentary, and I said, sure. And we've been getting bits and pieces of film for the last, God, I don't know, 8 years, I think it is. And it's the first of 3 volumes, the first of 3 films is done. And we're hoping that we'll find some venue, maybe on public radio, public television or something. So that's what we're doing, and it will be out. And there are cards out in the lobby, I think, that we have that show that. You can see this, right? You can see that, okay. So that's the film we're doing. Another question?
My name's John, and I stumbled on this lecture tonight. Thank you. And I just wondered if you've visited, I mean, you know, Moby Dick, Melville's up in Pittsfield, for example, where I happen to be born, and Mark Twain lived in Hartford and things like that.
Yeah.
Did you visit, and I'm Sojourner Truth, by the way, I went through Northampton, as you probably are aware, but I just wondered about that kind of atmosphere, you know, if you did any of that while you were doing your work.
You mean like following the trail of Melville and Sojourner Truth?
Yeah, just seeing if you got a spirit, I don't know, to the atmosphere. No? Okay.
No, I did nothing like that. I have visited, I've given a lecture at Melville's home. But no, I never did any of that. I visited the museum and the library down in New Bedford. Yeah, I put some time in that library. No, the Moby Dick was dictated to me. The only choices I had was how, I don't know, I didn't have a choice on that. I started to say I had a choice on why, but I didn't. It was dictated to me by lines. I had to have, you know, those, which is standard, that's not unusual. But yeah, I didn't have any latitude. You know, he even corrected my drawings sometimes. He said, well, you know, you've got the shadow going the wrong way. And I'm saying, what the fuck do you think I'm doing? I mean, that's not what art is. And that's not what good illustration's about. Another question. I'm having fun now. I'm sorry about my false start tonight. That was a little embarrassing. I've never done that.
Hi, good evening. Just a question about the technique of the cutting of the wood. It seems apparent that your artistic style evolved over time with the, I guess I could say, technological limitations of the time, really bringing out your work. Would you say that that would be an accurate statement, that it evolved as the technology evolved, as your craft evolved?
Yes. I think I heard your question, and the answer, I believe, is yes. I evolved as an engraver, as an artist, as a man, doing all of that and doing my work, and I think the press came along as well. I mean, you compare the first one to the most recent, and there's a world of difference in there. And it's because I'm never satisfied with what I do. And if there are students in this room, I really implore you, don't ever be satisfied with what you do. It's a death knell. You'll end up painting little cottages. Don't do it. Keep getting better. Next question, if there is one.
She's over here.
I can't see.
I know.
Hi.
Yes.
I would just love to hear what you love about wood engraving.
Oh. That one, huh? It is direct. There's no pussyfooting around. There's no gray. You've got black, you got white. That's it. And I like that crispness. I like that definition. And when I'm cutting away all that white, if you don't understand what we were saying, with engravings, as with woodcuts or linoleum cuts, I have to cut away what's not printing, leaving what is printing. And in doing that, it's very slow, meticulous. I'm like this when I'm engraving. It is very meditative. And when I started a bit of therapy a few years ago, my therapist recognized right off that I have something of a monk's attitude. I live alone, and I cherish my solitude, except when I am with my family. But it's that meditative sense of it, and the crispness of it, and the ain't no pussyfooting here. You see what I cut. It's not altered in any way. So, another question? I can't see out there. I'm sorry.
You mentioned a number of people that served as mentors for you, and I was wondering if you could talk about some of your mentees or somebody that we should be looking forward to next.
Who's next?
You know, it's funny you would ask that question. Brian Conway is here in the audience. He's one that was in my class at Williston a long time ago. I have a hard time bringing up names in the best of times. Ask me to come up with names in this situation in front of an audience, ain't gonna happen. But I mean, Adelaide Murphy is here. She's one of my most brilliant. There we go. She's also a family favorite. Yeah, there are a number. There are really quite nice. My mind just won't work that way anymore. So currently, I'm mentoring a Smithy. She's a senior. She was in my class, my last class that I taught. She was my TA. She's a math and physics major. And she did an engraving, a wood engraving, ingrained boxwood, about the size of a business card. It's better than anything basically I've ever done. She's, okay, I'm not going to use the F word again. She's brilliant. She really is. But I don't know what she's going to do now. She's in that science track, but she wants to come over to major in printmaking and doing some grad work. And I know she's serious about it because I'm getting requests for the recommendations. Teaching is the most sacred thing I do. And when I wrote that little paragraph in the middle there that's not really a good place to do it, but I had to get that in. That's my other job. But actually, in my heart, for the last damn near a century, teaching is what's in my heart. I'm going to say it, I love the art of teaching, which is not spewing out facts and expecting them to be regurgitated back. It's about making kids aware, showing them things that they didn't know about. Open up their lives. Anyway, yeah, real important to me. And I resigned. No, I retired because of this wheelchair, you know. Came along, made me a cripple, and I can't get around a print shop in a wheelchair. So I hope that answered your question. I really did try. Is there another?
I'm sorry, this is not an artistic question. You mentioned earlier that the environment of your childhood was whatever. And how did you, speaking of evolution, how did you evolve out of that environment?
God, I wish I knew. I mean, I wish I knew so that I could talk about it or write about it or do something. It was gradual. I know when it started. It started in 1958, 57, somewhere in there. It was summertime. My mom and dad had invited some folks over to play canasta, I guess it was back then. And there was a little fan on the floor over here, you know, a little oscillating fan. Doors were open. And then a cavalcade drove in front of our house. That's a bunch of redneck trucks and vehicles shouting out things that I can't say here. But they are things I have said when I was young, falling in line. And then all of a sudden, slam, the screen door on our front porch started banging back and forth. Across the street from us were 3 black families. It was very unusual that that black families would be on the upper side, you know, on the high ground, not on the low. It's a very interesting situation that I've never quite figured out. But they were there, and Vanita was one of my mother's closest friends. I know you think that that's bullshit, but it's true. They were devoted to each other all until my mother died. And when Vanita, she was trying to get in, and I think she probably had her hand here and pull in at the same time. She finally got in the house, and this is a woman who had really dark skin. But when she came in that house, her face was as pale as the dust in your fireplace. And that made a big impression on me. And that started it. And then I fell in with my daddy, my stepfather, was he was the manager of the Chattanooga Golf and Country Club. And he had a chef there. His name was John. I never knew John's last name. But he big man. And he was always wanting me. He was a deacon in his church. And he was always after me to go to church with him. I said, John, I can't go to church with you. You know, if I go to church with you, my daddy'd kill me. Kill you too. And that just went on for a while. And John wouldn't give up. And one day he said, well, you don't have to tell him. And that's a good point. So we met downtown. I parked my car. He picked me up. And we went to his church. And it was springtime. And I got to tell you, there were more colorful hats in that reception room I've ever seen in my life. And I was welcome. I was the only white person probably in a quarter of a mile radius. And I was welcome. Hell, the preacher even said, I was going to go and sit up there in the sanctuary with John. Preacher grabbed who was bigger than John. I mean, this guy looked like a pro football player. And he said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to go out there with you. He said, no, you're not. You're going to be up here with me. I said, oh, okay. And so I got up there, and he says, now, he went through the whole morning, and then he said, now, ladies and gentlemen, he said, we got the Reverend Barry Holmes with us this morning. That was my stepfather's name, because he didn't know my name either. He said, Barry Holmes with us this morning. He's going to give us the morning prayer. Well, I said, oh, okay. And I gave a prayer. And anyway, that's pretty much the end of the story. But here's the point, that if John had gone with me to my church, he would not have been welcomed. He might have even ended up on a telephone pole. So, I hope that's enough of an answer. I can't say that I'm over it. I have referred to myself as a recovering racist for 40 years, more. I don't know. I think we have to quit, don't we, sometime? I mean,